Welcome back to More Than a Game, a podcast dedicated to the Premier League, the A-League and more. Today on the show, Swagelaide United heap more pain on the victory. Everton and Burnley heap more pain on Everton. A Dortmund science experiment heaps pain on U2 frontman. I'm Colby, and I'm joined today by Jesse and Damo at a weird time, boys. We're normally Sunday night kind of situation, but here we are at Sunday lunchtime. Boys, I mean, we can't exactly get into the froth just yet, but what have we got on the menu today? What's for breakfast? What kind of beverages have you got? Talk me through it.
I've got 0 beverages. I'll leave that one to Jesse.
Go on and try.
I've got a Coca-Cola, so really hitting it hard this morning. But it's mainly because the last drink I had before I went to bed last night was a Guinness while I watched Leeds versus Chelsea. So I guess it's all about balance, isn't it?
Big beverage, Jesse, and a big show today, boys. We've got active problems in Victoria with the active support. We've got Premier League manager sackings to talk about, the A-League weekend so far, the Champions League and Sports Flick, and also a bit of Premier League as well. So we better get stuck into it. But first, give us your moments of the week, Jesse.
Boys, I'm absolutely drowning in them. And I really apologize in advance if I just blatantly steal some of yours. So just feel free to chip in if we're crossing some wires here. It's been an absolute buffet of moments of the week this week. The Messi goal in the Champions League, absolutely outstanding. Followed closely, if not, bettered, some might say, if you're a Burnley fan, by Dwight McNeil's postage stamp goal last night. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, moving across to the Champions League, Sergio Oliveira's goal for Porto against Juventus. Sorry, Andy, obviously being a Juve fan, but that was such a clutch free kick at a really clutch moment, and you have to respect that. And then moving across to the A-League, and I'm sure we're going to talk about these two moments. You've got the Hatch debut goal early in the week against MacArthur for the Mariners, and then, of course, the celebration Yengi against victory last night for McDonald's FC. Pretty special in front of the fans, and I guess that's something that we're going to rip into later on when we talk about the victory.
So you've just covered every goal from the week's football. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and
we'll see you next week.
Damo, what about yourself, mate?
Look, my moment of the week is it's a half moment of the week, half own goal in Salford City. I'm sure everyone's familiar with them. They're the team that's owned by the Man United class of 92. They won their first trophy last night. Overnight, they beat Portsmouth in the EFL Cup final. The EFL Cup's, I think, League One and League Two clubs only. But unfortunately...
Is that the Papa John's trophy, Damo?
That is the Papa John's trophy. Unfortunately, that was the 1920 last season's final. So they'll only hold the trophy for 24 hours when Sunderland play Tranmere tonight for this season's trophy.
It's going to be a very quick parade.
Boys, I can't go past Kusini Yengi for my moment of the week from last night's original rivalry at Marvel Stadium. We will talk about this in more detail soon on the show, but I mean, I have to bring that up first. Playing a rival team, he's just come off the bench, gets his first A-League goal, and then jumps the barrier and does the swag celebration in front of a couple of Victory fans. There wasn't too big of a crowd there, but oh my God, inject that into my veins right now.
Shades of Cantona about that celebration. Just just the staunch them out, or even Balotelli. There's a bit of Balotelli about it.
I think
the balls on the lad to do that.
Yeah. I think I've seen that little swag walk on his TikTok.
Damo and I were checking out Yengi's TikTok before we started recording, and I think I'm going to have to check it out a bit more afterwards because the man's got it. I want to see some of those as celebrations. And boys, what stood out to you in the wrong way this week? We'll start with you, Damo.
I'll let Jesse go first here because my own goal will probably segue straight into the next section about managers getting sacked. So,
good.
Jesse, you go on here.
Well, after naming half the week's events and my moments of the week, I suppose it's a reflection of there's not really that much for me that I could pick out. There was a known goal this week, which is probably a good thing. I guess if I've obviously really been nitpicky, I think Juve exiting the Champions League is a bit of an own goal, because I think if you look at the Barca side of things and Messi, I think we all kind of knew from the first leg that they were going to go out. But I think the draw there for Juventus was very much still there for the taking, and on home turf to not be able to progress, and Ronaldo out early again must be very hard for Juventus fans. So I think that's, for me, the own goal for this week.
Yeah, we'll cover that on in a bit more detail in the Champions League segment as well, and break that down as well. So my own goal, boys. Back on Yengi as well. Don't know whether you saw this, but basically it was, I think, during the game still. The game hadn't even finished, and he was getting racist comments on his Instagram. I mean, we don't know whether these are Victory fans, and we don't want to necessarily point the finger, but you'd think that's where some of them are probably coming from, given that celebration and the moment of the game where those comments started to come in. And it was just disgusting, really, that kind of thing can happen. I mean, I saw it on Twitter and didn't want to give it any more airtime necessarily by interacting with it on the More Than a Game Twitter. But I mean, the Victory fans were sort of like, they've been going on all week about how the club hasn't come out and made a statement about the on-field performances and the state of the club. But I think, and I haven't checked, but I think the club really need to come out and make a statement about this and basically condemn it to the extent that it is any Victory fans involved. I think they just need to come out and pretty swiftly condemn that and try and hold some of the people accountable to the extent they weren't just all burners. But yeah, absolutely disgusting.
Agreed.
Damo, own goal, mate.
I think it's pretty obvious. My own goal is Chris Wilder leaving Sheffield United. Now, where do you want me to start, boys? What's
the floor's yours.
Preferably Sunday, and maybe finish.
Make sure you mention Heckingbottom and tell me who he is, because that name just sounds like an insult from like the Doge memes.
Yeah. I mean, well, obviously the news broke, I think it was yesterday, that Wilder is left the club. Still kind of differing reports. Some say that he was sacked. The official statement said it was by mutual consent. Some reports say Wilder walked away. So no one really knows what happened there. But
mutual termination's very A-League areas, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty safe to say that Wilder and the owner of the club had a bit of a falling out. The owner, Prince Abdullah, during the week signalled his intention to sell a whole bunch of players, the most valuable players in the squad, to kind of recoup a bit of the funds that he thought Wilder didn't spend very well, which, to be fair, is a good. Wilder didn't spend very well. That was one of his downfalls. But Wilder said that those kind of players were vital to get the club back to the Premier League, and he walked out, by some reports on that reason, really. But I mean, it kind of digs me a little bit deep, where Prince Abdullah has spent over £250 million British pounds in the last 9 months on buying, purchasing, and creating multiple football clubs around the world to create this United World Group moniker, which is a poor man's version of the City Football Group. I think he's got 5 clubs around the world, which are all now second division or second tier or even third tier clubs in the countries he's got them in. So if he's one that's complaining about there not being enough money, then, I mean, what's he spending money on this kind of thing for? So
just back to the Wilder, I guess, sacking or termination by mutual consent, or whatever we're calling it. I mean, are you a bit surprised by this, Damo? I mean, obviously, like any manager who's rock bottom and about to get relegated has got a big target on their heads. But I mean, you've sort of said all along that you didn't expect Wilder to be sacked. You expected him to go down with the club and have them bounce back up. Like, what did you actually make of the sort of departure?
Well, I mean, there was a whole bunch of rumors. I think it was probably about 2 months ago or so. It was the week of Sheffield United getting their first win that Wilder said he was going to walk away. So, the club, the board have always backed him, and they've always, asked him to try and stay. So, I mean, I always said that if Wilder was going to leave this season, it was going to be because he wanted to leave, not because he got sacked. I mean, as a business decision, it makes sense to keep him around because he wants to be there and he's probably the best manager for the job in getting them promoted. But, he made some errors. Like I said, he made some bad signings. He spent a lot of money on players that didn't really turn out to be that good. He kind of failed to adapt to the game post the COVID break and there being no fans. But, I mean, ultimately, I think the club is in a far worse place without him. And I'm kind of worried that this is the beginning of a slippery slope for Sheffield United back down the leagues.
You touch on the fans. You touch on the fans there, Damo. I just think that's a huge thing. I mean, Sheffield's definitely suffered with no fans there, so it's a bit of a shame. We don't sort of see what the resurgence would be like once the fans are back. With Wilder still there, we sort of will never know if they were able to sort of turn it around. I know that injuries have been plaguing as well, but the fans I think have really affected. Having no fans around has really affected Sheffield.
And one of Wilder's things, right, was being able to get such a tune out of those players, a lot of whom essentially came from the third and fourth tier of English football. I'm really worried as to what any other manager coming in will be able to do with those same group of players. Like, presumably they'll need to get their own players in because, I really don't know whether any other manager is going to have that group playing as well as Wilder had them playing. Not, bad big money signings are one thing, but being able to get good results out of the others is another issue as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned just before, Colby, that they've got a Paul Heckingbottom has been given the caretaker role, which I read a great comment that said, "Why has he been given the job? We're going to finish Heckingbottom anyway." But Paul Heckingbottom is a former assistant of Eddie Howe, and so is Jason Tindall, who is one of the assistants under Heckingbottom at the moment. Alan Nils stayed on. He's been Wilder's right-hand man for the better part of 6 or 7 years now across multiple jobs. So he's also stayed on. But it kind of seems from reading a lot of things on Twitter and a lot of kind of early reports say that the club's trying to line up Eddie Howe for the start of next season. But the rumor is Eddie Howe doesn't want to take the job now because he doesn't want another relegation on his resume. So, but ultimately, I think Chris Wilder will be back in the Premier League before Sheffield United will. Like, where do you think Wilder's going to end up? What kind of club suits him?
Well, what kind of club can reproduce overlapping centre backs? Because I tell you what, I mean, if you can do that with the squad he had at Sheffield, then I don't know. Like, I mean, I look at the other teams around that area and the ones that are potentially going to come back up, and I feel like at least for now, the coaches are pretty settled. So I don't know. It's a good question, Dan.
Oh yeah, sorry, Colby. I actually read earlier that if Newcastle can stay up, he'd be a great fit for a club like Newcastle, who've got a ravenous kind of fan base that he's, kind of what Sheffield United built their reputation over the last few years, the fans kind of getting behind them. And Newcastle are a big club. They always have been a big club in terms of fans and support. And it's someone like him that could change their club.
Yeah, Newcastle's definitely a good shout. And the other one I thought is if Burnley ever part ways with Deitch, I think Burnley would be a good fit for him as well. But we should move on. I can talk about this all day. Yeah, I know. More sackings though. This one's about a week old, but Harry Kewell sacked by Oldham. His sort of second or third, I think third gig now in the lower leagues of English football where he hasn't quite made it. And this is off the back of Muskie, Popper, also being sort of sacked from their roles in European gigs as well. Boys, I mean, what's going wrong for these Australian managers?
It's clearly a lack of Vegemite in these locations. It's affecting morale and what you see is an inevitable exit. So maybe we just need to see a correlation between Vegemite's stocks in those areas. No, I think with Kewell, I think in that sort of league and that sort of position, it's a bit of a precarious position because we talk about people lacking patience in the upper leagues. I think that considering what I've read about Kewell, it seems like they've shown a fair amount of patience to get to now. So I think they finally just snapped. That's my read on it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, I think Oldham had actually had something like 8 managers in the last 3 seasons even. So Harry Kewell's been their longest tenured manager for the last 3 or 4 years.
Exactly.
So yeah, they did have a lot of patience with him, but I think it was inevitable he was going to get sacked from that club because that's what they do.
And I don't. Yeah,
As
that's right.
for Popper and Muskie, they kind of went into roles that, you know, they had clubs under turmoil and clubs that were in the bottom of the league. So it's a kind of similar situation. When you're a club like that, that's the first thing they go to is they sack their manager. And clubs in those lower European leagues often have this huge high turnover of managers. So
yeah, just back on the Kuehl thing though, like you said, with the latest club that he was at, where they've gone through all these managers, like, I mean, that was well known before he sort of took on the job. And then I think when he went from Crawley to, I think it was
Port
Notts
Vale.
County.
Or
Was it Port Vale?
No, Notts County. It was
Notts County, I think, who were a bigger club than Crawley, but they were in a relegation battle when he joined as well. So it was a big risk to go there from that job, where he did okay with Crawley from memory and sort of had them mid-table and had improved performances. But it just seems like he's made 2 quite bad career decisions. I don't know who's advising him, but that's sort of what I'd put the Harry Kewell ones down to, just bad decisions.
He's gone from
sort of risky decisions.
He's gone from Winterfell FC to King's Landing United, and it's just the poison chalice. He should never have taken the Game of Thrones in the first place.
Don't know what to do with that one.
I mean, Aussie managers overseas, I mean, particularly in Europe, it just doesn't seem to work. They've got this dream that they want to be, you know, big European managers, and it doesn't work. But I think what Postecoglou's doing over in Asia, in Japan specifically, and kind of grooming lots of other Australian coaches through his assistants. I think it was Peter Klimovsky and then Arthur Papas both went over as assistants and now have top jobs in Japanese, the first and second division. And I think he's now got John Hutchinson and Sean Orlong, I think it is. He used to play for Adelaide United, young guy who's an assistant as well. So Postecoglou is kind of grooming these coaches and telling them that Asia is the route to take. So I think that might be the route to take for Australian managers. We saw Graham Arnold go there a few years ago without much success, though. So, I mean, it's tough. Australian players have been exported for years, but we've never really exported managers. So it's something that kind of needs to grow in our game.
Do you think do you think we're going from a manager here in the A-League, for example, straight to a manager in like a Belgium club, and it's just too big a jump? I mean, could they not be jumping in as an assistant and sort of learning the trade before they take on that position? Do we feel like they're skipping a step in some way?
I think you're exactly right. I feel going from a job in Australia, if you want to get used to whatever league you're going to, you've got to cut your teeth as an assistant somewhere. You know, the best coaches in the world very rarely go from being a player to a manager straight away. They've been an assistant for the better part of a decade before they get a top job.
And it's a gig where reputation, you know, you trade on your reputation so much. Like if you have a couple of failures, you have that weight to carry around. But I mean, conversely, if you have a few successes, like some of these top managers seem to be bulletproof and just get so many gigs, and some of the ones who you know may otherwise be successful are sort of coloured or tarred by a few poor stints early in their careers, I suppose. But we'll just have to wait and see where those 3 land, you know, whether they come back to Australia or whether they try to go to Asia or something like that. But I don't think we'll you know, definitely don't think this is the last we've seen of any of them. So it'll be interesting to see where they end up. One more news item, boys, before we get on to the matches, is just the active support problem in Victoria has sort of reared its head again this week. So since football came back after the COVID lockdowns, you know, Melbourne has obviously been hit with harsher cases and therefore harsher restrictions in the stadiums and things like that. And we've seen like active bays be tarped over and standing and singing and drums and stuff not allowed, and various levels of mask wearing required. But the NRL started this week, and we saw images of Melbourne Storm's game with Amy Park looking like it was like half to 3/4 full, with like none of the sections tarped over and people sort of like having flags and standing and waving and cheering. And stuff like that. So soccer Twitter, as you might expect, immediately jumped on this double standard, or this seeming double standard, pointing the finger at stadiums, who then pointed the finger at Victoria Police, who apparently set the rule based on health advice. But what do you make of this, boys? Is this a case of this apparent anti-football discrimination in Victoria creating a double standard, or is it something else?
It's all a bit of a shit show. It's I think it's poor on behalf of the A-League clubs. That I think when the rule was first put in place, it was probably an acceptable situation. This was 2 months ago when it was a very different environment in Victoria, or 3 months ago. It was very different here than it is now. So the clubs never tried to renegotiate or do anything to try and go, oh, can we get them back in? Or, I feel like they've just left it. And then all of a sudden the fans have gone, hey, remember us? Like, we're still here. Like, can you help us? And I think this is only going to be, more like rear its ugly head even more when the AFL starts on Thursday night and they've got all their cheer squads behind the goals going mental. So, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a murky waters, I think.
And because this is obviously something that's been going on since well before COVID, and I think there is some correlation to be had between the sort of policing at the stadiums and then the sharp decline of attendances and turnover of the active support groups we've seen, particularly in Victoria. And it seems like a lot of the sort of football going public here have had enough, particularly in COVID, and just aren't rocking up to games because of the increased scrutiny and restrictions over and above the sort of already pretty tight policing and security restrictions that were already there. But I just wanted to get your views, boys. What actually needs to be done about this, or what can be done about this?
I think for me, it's PR. Like the PR is really poor because just I think Damo hit the nail on the head when he was saying that it's because of the overlap in the rules. I mean, the rules 3 months ago or 2 months ago were very different to now, and so NRL clubs and AFL clubs have, they come in now and they're like, cool, this is what we can do, and we can have 3/4 of the stadium, and it's all fun and games. Whereas the A-League's, for some reason, still following rules that were relevant 2 months ago. And hasn't, and if anybody's got an ounce of PR about them, they'll understand that they could see the active support issue coming a mile away, and the media coverage is going to get. And for me, it just seemed like a completely avoidable situation, because this is a sensitive topic, particularly amongst football fans in Victoria. And I just think it was completely avoidable. So it's just one of those things which you kind of cringe at, because you sort of think, well, why did it need to happen? I just think it's a bit silly.
Speaking of PR.
I was just about to say, I don't think we'll see any change in this active sport situation this season. If anything, it may change next season when the Australian professional leagues have got a little bit more of gusto, a little bit more control, and they try and mix things up a little bit. But at this stage, I don't think we'll see any change for the rest of this A-League season.
Yeah, I agree, Damo, and that does link on with what I was about to say, because there was actually a statement after all of the noise about this week. Greg O'Rourke came out on Friday and gave a pretty weak-sounding sort of self-serving statement where he effectively just said, we'll continue to work closely with the clubs and the venues and the police, and we welcome today's decision to allow Melbourne City to provide select groups with drums and flags at Amy Park. And it just sounded like absolutely a nothing statement, and that nothing will really be done. Like, he might have shot off an email or something, but I'm not holding my breath for drastic changes in the culture with which football fans are treated either. So I think this will just be a continued source of frustration for football fans, particularly in Victoria. Just before we get on to the matches, we usually put out the call for listener questions and comments, and we've got a few that are relevant to various things that we're going to talk about on the pod. But we had some listener comments. One from AJ Mithen on Twitter, who just wanted to say this season is good fun about the A-League. So thanks for that. And we had one from one of our other Twitter followers, Ike, who wants to know what I do with all the time I save by saying "usual" instead of "usual." I'll just have to think about all the time I've saved with that. I should put it into preparing for this pod. So, but I haven't. But if you ever want to send us in comments or questions or any hot takes, listeners, you can always do that at mtagpodcast@gmail.com or on any of our social medias. Get in our DMs or in the comments, and we'll post links to all of those socials in the notes to this podcast. Coming up next.
Each just hits different, doesn't it?
Coming up next, the Bunnings A-League Match Week 11. Boys, the Melbourne Victory continue their slide, going down at home to another rival, Adelaide, in the original rivalry at Marvel Stadium. The VUC went up early via a brilliant free kick from Jake Brimmer, and I take back every time that I've questioned his set-piece abilities, just for the record. But Adelaide struck back quickly via Stefan Mork and then landed knockout blows in the second half, thanks to halftime sub or second half sub Kusina Yengi, who came on for a goal and an assist, and a healthy side of rattling the small crowd of Victory fans. Boys, where's the bottom for the Victory?
Well, speaking of rattling, the keeper got done by a real rim job there, didn't he? I have to say, though, as well, the keeper was, I felt like at first glance it was an absolute scream. I saw it live. And still take nothing away. But I mean, where was the keeper? I mean, he was halfway. He just put himself in a really uncomfortable position, and maybe he stored and saved it, but he didn't give himself much of a chance. So, I think that goal sort of flattered Brimmer a little bit. But as far as Victory goes, mate, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, both of you, because I remember going to that Phoenix game a couple of weeks ago when we were just getting heckled by the Victory fans, who were very cocky with a couple of the Rudy headers and very confident after that win against the Phoenix. And all of a sudden, it's just back to square one again. What are your thoughts, guys, as far as what's going wrong? I mean, it just seems like there's a really low confidence about the squad at the moment.
Yeah, I think that from the top down, the club is just in a rotten place. The playing squad, the fans, the business behind the club, everything just seems to be not going right at the moment. And I don't know where their bottom is, but I feel like they're only getting worse. Week by week, the fans are getting revolting more. The players are playing worse. The media are getting on their back more. Everything is getting worse week by week.
I think that's right, Damon. I think your feeling is right. I've got a couple of stats here which sort of confirm that. Well, stats and comments. One is that this loss for the VUC is the furthest they've been from the top of the table after 11 rounds in their history. This is their worst position at this stage of the competition. And they've conceded 3 or more goals in 3 consecutive games for the first time in their history. And even on the night, even in the game last night, I heard a lot of the commentary from Archie and Zappers, who are Melbourne people and Victory fans both, commentary about how much this game means to the Adelaide players, and they kept going on about that and the rivalry and how much the Adelaide players were up for it. But conspicuously absent from that was any mention about how much this meant to the Victory players, or how much heart or desire they were playing with.
Yeah, I think that was a little bit of a whether it was a conscious or not, it's kind of a bit of a defense mechanism on their part as Victory fans, because it's kind of like when Brisbane play Sydney, and Brisbane always get up for the game against Sydney just because they are, and Sydney just say, we don't even care about you. They do that kind of thing. Victory are kind of telling Adelaide, you care about this game so much, we don't even care about you. We've got bigger rivalries than this, So it's kind of like we're still a bigger club than you kind of, jab.
Well, they do have bigger rivals in some senses, and one is Sydney FC, and they'll face them next week in the Big Blue. So, that would be very interesting to see if the VUC can bounce back or put in any kind of improved performance at all. We've got a question from George, from our very own G-Man. How's Brebs still got a gig? So, Damo, last week on the pod, you said that it's a bad time to get a new manager given the state of the Victory squad, but surely Brebs has to go to send a message to the VUC as a club. They can't tolerate those kind of results and performances, and you just put in a caretaker or something like that. Sure, don't get a new manager, don't give a new manager a poison chalice, but surely you have to, if you're the Victory, just as a statement about what kind of a club you are, you have to. You can't tolerate those kind of performances and results. Yeah,
you'd think so. I mean, when I said that last week, it was, It was a thought about moving forward and who's going to be the manager. But I think you're right, Colby. I think, whether it's now, whether it's in another week or a couple of weeks, in some way or another, a message has to be sent to the playing group and to the managerial group that this can't continue. And that message is most often sacking the manager. So I think you're right.
And the VUC fans are seeming to start to turn around and ask for it. A lot of the anti-club sentiment that I've seen from Victory fans on social media seems to be directed at the board and, oh, well, what about your corporate lunches? And you seem to be running the club so well. Sort of like Arsenal-style criticism where, like the club's making good money at corporate level, but the on-field performances and squad are neglected somewhat. But I'm seeing that starting to turn back towards the players and the manager somewhat. We had a comment from Dom Trimboli on Twitter that just said, F your whole organisation, Melbourne Victory. Kurtz and Muscat got sacked for a whole lot less. And I think he's got a point.
Yeah, and I saw a great comment on Twitter last night was just a response to Melbourne Victory's tweet to say defeat at Marvel. And the response on Twitter was, imagine putting in charge a guy who bet on his own team to lose when he was a contracted player. You really expected him to give a shit as a manager?
So brutal. So brutal.
So yeah, it's the club is just in a deep rot at the moment.
And I guess take nothing away from Adelaide. We have to mention Adelaide because like they've been on a decent run of form now. I think they've won 4 in a row, 4 straight wins, and they're up to second on the ladder. And 2 goals from Stefan Mork. What's he writing in his diary this week?
Dear diary.
Ever since his little spout with Kilkenny, Mork's been playing far better than Kilkenny has. So
Can I play at Marvel every week? Kind regard.
I actually have. I mean, since his stint at Brisbane, I've actually always rated Mork as a player, and I think he's becoming a more well-rounded number 8. He's starting to add goals to his game. I think we were chatting it was either in our preview or earlier in the season, we were chatting about Mork, and one of you, maybe it was Tommy, was saying, oh yeah, Mork's going to bang in all these goals. And I was like, no, he's not. Like, that's just not part of his game. He's a really dynamic box-to-box number 8. And, I like what he does, but he's not adding goals to his game. But actually, like, he's like, those goals were, pretty well-timed runs and pretty well-taken little goals. So, long may it continue for him.
Yeah, and look, game. And I criticised Carl Vitt and Adelaide United's decision to make him captain at the start of the year. I said, how can you have a 25-year-old kid as a captain of a football club when he's just been there 6 months? But I guess, this may have been the motivation for him to start playing so well and kind of leading from the front and as a player rather than as a voice or something around the club. So maybe it was a genius stroke by the managerial team. So credit to them for doing that.
Well, it's interesting, actually, just to find a word on that. So those are the kind of runs and positions that Riley used to take for Adelaide. So it's actually, if you think about it, it's probably a genius piece of recruitment if he continues to do that, because they've basically replaced I wouldn't say completely like for like, but you've got a goal scoring midfielder making those runs into the box and putting them away. So credit to them.
Is that Riley McBreen, as Archie likes to refer to him?
I put out the feelers last night about my frustration of listening to Archie, likening it to a cheese grater in my ears, and got some mixed feedback from the More Than a Game panel. A few people said that their dirty fetish was actually enjoying listening to Archie commentate.
I think Damo and I are in the silent majority of Archie and Zappa's lovers out there.
Only when they're together. Like Zappers and Archie, no, independently, no, but together, yes.
Well, I love how you keep bringing Zappers into it. It's like, at no point have I got a problem with Zappers. And you're just like, oh no, but it's Batman and Robin. It's Batman.
Why do you hate Zappers?
What's bizarre about Archie is that, as well as he's been elevated to a position where he has to talk more, and that's probably the bit that set me over the edge.
No, that's the bit that I like more. Like once you give the man more space to just talk, he would just like start to just talk absolute shit, and I'm here for it. A few more stray observations, boys. Did you see during the week that Teng Kuol, Alu's brother, has signed for Melbourne Victory from the GV Suns? So I think he was in the under 16s NPL, and he's banged in like 20 goals a season for like the past couple of years. So another one to watch. I don't know whether he's going to like play this season or whether he's in the squad this season or anything, or maybe it'll be a next season thing. Don't know, but definitely one to watch.
He's actually signed for their MPL squad, which their season starts next weekend, I think. So they're playing MPL 2 this year. So he may make it up to the first team. Like he said, I think he's only 17. But Aluol did say in an interview that Teng is his most talented brother and he's already better than him. So he's the one to watch. It's like the Toure brothers. Moussa Toure, the 14-year-old's the best of the lot.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing about this game, just before we do move on, boys, like Adelaide, the sub that Calviet made in the second half that changed the game was Al Hassan Toure off, Yengi on, and that changed the game. Al Hassan hasn't looked as sharp since coming back from injury. Obviously, he's still young and he still, probably needs to get back up to full speed and full fitness and sharpness and all of that. But there you go. Like this club that we know for just producing young talent and nurturing young talent just keeps on delivering.
It's just a conveyor belt of young players, isn't it?
Absolute smorgasbord. I was just going to say just one final thing on that, just on the Adelaide victory game, is that you've got that classic contrast between a club that's really struggling and you're just talking about another club that's producing great young talent. Well, that seems to be the biggest glaring omission from the victory here, because you're relying on Robbie Cruz to dig you out of this rotting hole. And it's like, well, you're seeing other clubs at the moment all across the league benefiting from having young players getting a crack. And we talked about this in the season preview as actually one of the things that Victory probably needed to do was actually give some of the young players a crack. So it'll be interesting to see if they do that now, if they're basically fighting a lost cause.
The problem with Victory is their academy has fallen so far behind what City is producing and what Wu are doing already. Victory's academy is falling that far behind that all the best players in Melbourne aren't going to Melbourne Victory anymore. All the best young players.
And I do think, though, that the Victory are producing some good young players. Like, I'm all about this new fullback. I think he's a fullback anyway, Bello. That's where he's been played. We saw him in the Knicks game we went and saw a couple of weeks back, and he just looked excellent since coming on. And Triple L, I think he's really got something as well. And they've got quite a few young players
at left back. So
yeah,
right.
yes, him as well. But I think the problem that Victory is still having is the balance with the young and the senior players. And Jesse, that goes to your point about they're relying on all these other guys and something just doesn't work. But actually, I do think that there are quite a few really promising young players at the Victory who will hit their stride. I don't know whether it'll be this season, but they definitely look to have a lot of talent. MacArthur and Melbourne City. So Melbourne City hosted MacArthur. It was a Friday night game. It was a quick fire 3 goals in like the space of about 15 minutes, but looks like it could have been a lot more in this one. It looks like it could have been should have been another 6-0 for Melbourne City. Boys, was this a case of Melbourne City just being too good or MacArthur being very average?
First, look, I'll watch this game on, I think it was Friday night, wasn't it? And City in the first half an hour were just untouchable. They were playing some of the best football I've seen any team play in the A-League this season. For that first, probably I'd say from about the 10th minute to the 30th minute, they just were untouchable, counter-attacking, so smooth and nice to watch. And I feel like they just took their foot completely off the pedal. They came out in the second half and they just went through the motions and went, oh, we've already won this game. It's fine. But on the other hand, MacArthur showed no intent to try and get back into the game in the second half. So probably a bit of both in, MacArthur not being at their best and City being better than their best, if you can put it that way.
Can we get a chef's kiss for that Naboo pass?
Oh.
It was just absolutely magnificent. And McLaren back into the goals again. So, looking very, very ominous. I think you're absolutely right, Damo, about it seems to be a City football group thing to do, isn't it? Go into a really fast 3-0 lead and then just sit back for the second half. I mean, I wish we could all do that. But yeah, I do think they took the foot off the pedal in the second half and just sort of conserved energy by the look of it.
Well, I mean, City have now scored. They've only had 3 clean sheets, I think, all year, and that's been in their last 3 games. They've scored 11 goals unanswered in those 3 games. So Kisnorbo was funny. I think we were on the pod just over a month ago talking about whether Kisnorbo's job was in trouble. Now he's looking like one of the best managers in the league.
Yeah, that was our pod with Shannon Damo, who's going to be back on the pod. He's going to be joining us again next week, so we'll have to ask him about Paddy Kisnorbo, and we'll get an update on where our thinking is at with Paddy at City, because surely he deserves to take some of the credit for these good performances as well. And Macca, Jesse, as you said, pulling away. He's got 10 in 10 now. Top of the Golden Boot by a couple now over Damo's boy Derbyshire, who's still in the hunt. But yes, that's ones to watch, and I think the Mariners will be the happiest with this result as well, because they still sit 6 points on top of the ladder. But the other game of the weekend so far, boys, was Sydney and Newey. Newey went up early after banter era Redders made an appearance for the second week in a row. But the substitution of Ninkovic did change the game, and regular era Duncan made some cracking saves in the first half and then just reverted to normal and got bamboozled by an Alex Wilkinson header, giving Sydney the win. Boys, is this a smash and grab by Sydney here?
It was a pretty lackluster performance by Sydney, and it says it all when Wilkinson scores the winner. But I think it was kind of bizarre in the sense that that first Redmayne, like what the heck is going on back there? Like it was like you're changing your controller batteries on FIFA, and your goalie accidentally passes the ball to the opposition player. It was nightmare stuff. And to be honest, I think you mentioned last night, Damo, that you felt that Sydney were lucky to get away with that. And I'd have to agree. I think that sometimes Sydney just somehow managed to dig themselves out of a hole, sometimes due to resilience. But I don't think it was so much about resilience last night. I just think it was a little bit of fortune that they got across the line. But take nothing away from the Grant goal. That was vintage Ryan Grant. So enjoyed that.
I think exactly how I put it was that was such an arsey win, which I think is the best way to describe that game. I mean, even the goal that won the game, like it was like this slow motion header that bounced into the ground and over the keeper or however it went, and it just felt like it fell into Sydney's hands.
Yep. That's the best way to describe it. But just on Redmayne, like a couple of poor performances now. Should Sydney think about dropping him? They've got, is it young Heward Bell on the bench?
Yeah, who used to be at Melbourne City, I think, didn't he?
Mm.
I saw Soccer Twitter posting a whole bunch of tweets and pictures and said, "Redders, you've had a good run. Your time's over." Like, it was only this time last season that people were talking about Redmayne being part of a Socceroos setup. So, it's life happens quickly in football.
Life comes at you pretty fast.
Redmayne's form's like me logging onto my Bitcoin account. I mean, 1 minute you're flying, and next minute you're in the absolute basement.
There was stonks. There was a lot of banter on Twitter that I did see about this, and it mainly was between Sydney FC fans, as you might expect, but also Western Sydney fans just chipping in with their views on Redders as well. Basically saying that he was a fraud, and that he was only ever very good because he had an excellent defence in front of him, which we all remember was protected even further by that double pivot of O'Neill and who was the other one? Bratton. Anyway, they had a Briante and O'Neill, and they had they just had that solid defence in front of them, and basically that Redders got his Socceroos cap off the back of that. I don't know whether that's a particularly fair call, but that was put out there by a lot of the Western Sydney fans on Twitter, and a lot of the Sydney fans they seem pretty split on this. Some of them seem to want Redmayne to have a bit of a rest and a refresh, and some of them are very cautious about Heward Bell, because I think he was the one that had a particularly bad brain fade last time he had a spell. I think it might have been for City, where he came out and punched the ball and something pretty much on the halfway line, or just a really bad brain fade. I forget which game that was, but so who knows? I think Redders might still have the gloves next week.
The man's he's a paid actor. Get that man a Logie.
And just on the Wilkinson goal, I read a stat from Andy Howe that said basically that this goal came after one of the longest droughts in terms of appearances in Australian football history. So absolute collector's item. And then one of the Sydney FC fan accounts, Sky Blue Views, tweeted, "When Wilco last scored, Apple released their first ever iPad."
Yeah, wow, that's a great stat.
So still to come though this weekend, because we're obviously recording earlier than usual before the Sunday games, because we're actually going to the Brisbane Roar Woo game this afternoon. The Woo have moved this game, thank God, from Geelong to Amy Park, because I think the AFL have, there's some AFL rights thing on GMHBA now, obviously with Geelong playing there and stuff like that. So it seems like they might not be playing any or many games back there. What do you think about that?
Well, no public transport chat to talk about, unfortunately, with no Geelong games. So it's a setback.
I actually think that they signed this initial contract with the Geelong Football Club to use the stadium. That contract ends very, very soon, and they've not renegotiated for any games. I think they were under the assumption that they could or would have been in their stadium by the time that contract had finished, which I think was initially like a 2-year contract. So I don't know if obviously there's a process of renegotiating, trying to get more games there, but the traveling circus could go to some more venues near you.
When are we going to see them in their own stadium?
They'll probably fold before they build their ground.
maybe when Wilkinson scores his next goal.
Yeah.
All right, still to come, match day 28 of the Premier League. All right, boys. Early goals to Chris Wood and Dwight McNeil gave Burnley a little bit of breathing room between them and the relegation zone with a win on the road against Everton. Chris Wood chat in a moment, Jesse. But first, what's wrong with Everton? I mean, between them and Burnley, I just don't know what's happening. I don't know who's blowing hotter or colder.
Somebody mentioned the other day, I can't remember where I read it, but they were talking about Richarlison through the middle. I have to double check what the shape was in this game, but while that wasn't necessarily a bad thing for Richarlison, it was affecting Calvert-Lewin quite a lot. And so the goals had kind of dried up for Everton, that with Hummus basically never been fit. So you're seeing these games where they're going up by like 1 goal and just trying to hang on, and rather than actually push on any further. And so you do feel that if they concede a goal, that they're not like the most prolific team at the moment, and you don't really know how they're going to get back into it. And actually, it did end up being DCL who managed to get back on the score sheet. I think it's his first goal for a while to get them back in it. But yeah, I don't think that they look like a team that's confident in front of goal at the moment. And that's a real contrast to when we saw them at the start of the season and they were scoring like 3-4 goals at home. And that was very much with Hummus in the team. So I just think creatively, they're if they go down by a goal, I mean, and Pickford's got a mistake in him any day. But when they go down by...
It was young Joao Virginia on debut in goal for Everton today. Yeah,
in this game it was, for sure. The defence looked very shaky, and I just think that they're low in confidence when they go down by a goal. I don't think they've got the resilience at the moment to sort of fight back. And yeah, it's a bit of a worry, I think. Ancelotti's trying to be pragmatic, but it is the sort of limitations of the squad he's got at the moment.
Yes, and I think part of that seems to be their home record as well. They've lost 5 games at home this season, and it's only Liverpool who have lost 6, who have lost more games at home. So that looks like, I mean, I'm always bamboozled by these sort of stats, particularly during COVID when they can't even have fans in there. But yet, we're seeing this, these home and away hoodoos or advantages still coming into play, and it looks like this is definitely a bit of a worry for Everton this season.
I mean, I think the way you guys are talking about Everton, they've got some problems, but let's not forget that they're still only, I think, 4 points off the top 4. So they're in and about that area. I mean, they're 3 points above Liverpool at the moment. So, I mean, it's not crisis mode at Everton right now. There are things that need to be fixed, but they're doing really well.
They're just a confusing club, though. Like they won all those games in a row and looked solid and looked like they were going to be challenging for the Champions League spots. And now they're back to having lost 2 on the bounce. It's just you just don't know which Everton you're going to get on any particular day, and it probably does have a lot to do with the injuries to creative players, in particular Hummers, like you were saying as well, Jesse. But they're just such a hard team to predict at the moment, and so are Burnley. But Burnley. That win was absolutely critical for Burnley, who move. What are they like 7 points, I think, off the relegation zone now. So that gives them some breathing room above Newcastle and Brighton, who are very much sucked into a relegation battle. And we'll either talk about that later on or next week. There's some big fixtures in the relegation battle, so we might talk about that next week as well. But
it's the gegenpressing from Chris Wood, Colby. It's just irrepressible. And that pressure, I mean, when you've got the tall timber that is Chris Wood breathing down your neck, things happen. And Xhaka felt the full brunt of it last week, and this time it was Everton who just coughed the ball up to him. It was a tidy finish in the end, but it wasn't actually a difficult goal in the end for him. So pleased to see.
I'm always surprised when he scores goals with his feet, though.
Yeah, like it is sometimes you do forget that he does have feet. He brings the ball down with his chest. He scores goals with his head. I mean, the legs are just for running, really, aren't they? But sometimes, occasionally, he does have a really tidy finish in him. So I'm just glad that he's still doing it. I mean, when Rodriguez and Barnes are in form, it is actually not out of the question for Wood to not be in the top Burnley team. So it is important for him when he gets his starts to score goals. So I'm pleased to see that he's doing that.
A lot of pointless running in the Leeds and Chelsea game, boys. 2 points dropped for Chelsea, who had the chance to go level with Leicester in third, but shot blanks in their trip away to Leeds. Havertz led the line but couldn't buy a goal, and the ball hit the crossbar at both ends. Still 13 undefeated, though, for Chelsea, and I think Mendy's got more clean sheets than goals conceded. Are you happy with this result if you're a Chelsea fan, boys?
I think... Chelsea didn't look great, but I mean, you have to give credit where it's due. Leeds, this is probably their best defensive performance this season by a long, long way. I think it's the first time I've actually seen them be able to lock down and really nullify their opposition from having any chances at all. But like you said, that's probably also a bit down to Chelsea just being a little bit poor, and their front line doesn't look great at the moment. They're a bit all over the place. None of them are really in form. So I still find it strange to see Chelsea so high up the league when, their front four essentially are playing so poorly.
I'm ready to deep dive into this, boys. Stayed up, watched this one with the Guinness, and had a brief chat with George about it last night as well in Chelsea Corner. And I said to him that I had Mount in my fantasy team, and it was very difficult for me to know where Mount was at any time because you had the Barbershop Boys, you had Kai Havertz, you had Mason Mount. Who else was there? There was like Jorginho, there was Pulisic with the laser beard.
Barbershop Quartet.
Yeah. They were all singing off the same hymn sheet. Well, actually, no, they weren't. But the thing I noticed tactically about this is that they seem to have
enough harmonies.
Not enough harmonies. They weren't in harmony, that's for sure. They were struggling, like they were trying to flood the right flank. So it was a bit of a weird setup because they had Havertz up front, but then they had Mount on the left, Ziyech in the middle, and Pulisic out right. And when we've seen Chelsea be most effective, especially when Ziyech is in the team, is when James, Reece James, is running down the right wing and providing that space for Ziyech. But Ziyech just looked completely lost. I mean, Pulisic wasn't having a bad game. He actually had a decent first half, but he was running into Ziyech's space, and Leeds are so quick to press you, as you were saying earlier, Damo, about looking tight. They did look really tight, but they were just so quick to close down his space that Ziyech's left foot was effectively nullified for most of the first half and the second half. So he ended up getting hooked in the second half and looked really frustrated. Pulisic as well. And then after then, it really didn't look like they were going to get a goal. It leads to shut up shop. They brought on Rodrigo and then brought him back off again. And it just looked like they were happy just to shut up shop after about 60 minutes. And as you guys say, Chelsea have been very, very tight at the back, but have struggled to create. And when Mount went off, it with about 15 minutes to go, you never really felt like they were going to score. So I wonder, just guys, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I mean, if you had Pulisic on the left, Mount through the middle, and then Ziyech on the right with Havertz in the middle, I mean, maybe there would be more balance there. I just think that Tuchel was clearly trying to just flood that right-hand side. It wasn't a bad strategy because you can have Alioski out there who can be a bit of a hand grenade sometimes. So it wasn't a bad strategy, but it just didn't work. I mean, Pulisic and Ziyech got in each other's way. That's at least how I saw it. Any thoughts on that, boys?
Yeah, look. Tuchel's got all the weapons at his disposal in that front line, but I mean, it's
too many weapons at his disposal. Arguably,
Yeah.
like that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, but and it's always the front four that is the last like piece to the puzzle when you're building a side. And he's come in and he's assured them up defensively. They've conceded very few goals. They haven't lost for nearly 2.5 months or something since he's been there. So, yeah, I mean, he's as they say, you build a team from the back, and that's what he's done. So those guys at the front will take some time to kind of get used to what Tuchel wants them to do.
Yeah, and I did see a lot of chatter about on social media, sort of saying that that Tuchel is being sort of found out a little bit whenever he comes up against a really high class manager. Obviously, Bielsa is a bit of a and very very known for being a tactician as well, and that's how this game sort of read to me. Like it was a real sort of tactical battle that sort of ended in a stalemate, but it was an entertaining one, and we should give some love to Leeds as well. Damo, you mentioned great defensive performance from them, and they've had their own issues this season with defense, with injury and the like as well. So
I think they've conceded the second most goals in the league, Leeds. So, I mean, defensively, they've got lots of issues, but I mean, they're just able to score enough goals to outweigh that.
The pitch was pretty it held up okay considering how terrible it's been, but still, once they got close to the sideline, no player looked confident in their touch. So it did. That's not great when you're trying to watch football. It just sort of, you see players just kind of gingerly trying to tiptoe around the touchline.
I'm used to that in Division 3 futsal. So
in Faulkner Park, yeah.
Some of the other results, boys, we should just keep it moving. Newcastle Villa 1-1. It was a diving header. You love to see it from Watkins in the 85th minute. Looked to have it wrapped up for Villa, but then Lascelles pulled it out of the fire for Newcastle with the last action of the game with a pretty tasty header of his own. This would have taken Villa above Liverpool if they'd held on for the win. But Villa look like they might just be playing with house money now, boys, given that they seem to be exceeding even their own wildest expectations. They're still sitting up in ninth. Does that make you a bit complacent, boys?
I think Villa have just had a bit of a dip in form. And all surrounding when Jack Grealish isn't playing is really the heart of that side. But I mean, in the same vein, Newcastle actually, in patches in this game were quite impressive. But it's really annoying to me. I mean, not that I wish for a club to be in a relegation battle, but I want the final day, the final 2 weeks of the season to be really exciting. And if Newcastle keep drawing games, like I think Tommy said it in the group chat, if Newcastle keep drawing, then they're not going to be in that conversation on the final day.
Well, Newcastle are 2 points outside of the relegation zone, so still very much in it, and Brighton are only ahead of Fulham outside the relegation zone on goal difference. And Fulham, at least in performances, have been much improved of late as well. So, I think that'll be one to watch. And next week there'll be some fixtures that will affect the relegation battle as well. So we'll talk about those a bit more on next week's pod. A few more regulation wins just to round out the results. Fulham obviously roundly done 3-0 by City, which we all expected, and Palace with a regulation 1-0 over West Brom. But just looking forward to tonight's or the big game overnight. I think it's overnight tonight, the North London derby. So this is 7th against 10th. Does this feel like a big deal, boys?
Similar positions for both of them because both of them are gunning in the Europa League. So it is a really strange time to have a North London derby because, I mean, like there's no guarantee either of them continue on their merry way in the Europa League, so they might not necessarily progress as far as they want to in that. And if they do, they'll find themselves back in the league in 7th and 10th and going, all right, that's the end of the season for us. So I'm finding it quite tricky to read what they're going to do as far as who's going to actually line up. I mean, it's kind of like, because the game's so big, they can't not start, say, Aubameyang and Bale and these kind of players. But at the same time, they've also just played Europe a few days ago. So I'm not really sure who they're going to play, but I do get the feeling that from a fan perspective, both managers will just have to bring out the big guns just because it's a derby. I mean, that'll force their hand, at least for Mourinho.
It will be very interesting, Jesse, yeah, because as you say, they're both in Europe and they both look like they might have a shot at the Europa League, and both would be very keen to have that trophy, especially given where they are on the ladder this season. Obviously, they're both saying they're very focused on the Premier League and finishing as high as possible. But who's the win more important to?
I think Spurs.
I was going to say, I think Arsenal need to win this because, I mean, for Arsenal, the whole Arteta and the fans feel like whatever the result this season, Arteta's going to stay. But I mean, he's on track to have them finish the lowest finish in the Premier League for something like 20-something years. So I think it's an incredibly important result for Arsenal, and if not for anything else, for the Arsenal fans to try and get a bit of hope back. Because I mean, it's a North London derby. If they win this game, it could give them the momentum they need to shoot them, get them more results, shoot them back up the ladder.
I think Jesse, why is it more important for Spurs?
Oh, I think that you could make a case for either, and I think Arsenal for sure, like it's a massive game for them as well. But I think for Spurs, I mean, if they win this, they go to 48 points, very close to the top four, very much within touching distance of the top four. And as I said before, like that, neither of these teams, they both can't win the Europa League. One of them's got to do it. So if Tottenham don't win it, they'll be pretty gutted to finish outside the top four. And I think with the squad they have and the form that they're in at the moment, they should finish in the top four.
We've got Sal in the comments saying Arsenal need it more because we've been shit. Arsenal fan and listener of the pod. Thanks for that, Sal. If you ever want to get into the comments, we normally post the link to these streams for the YouTube live, which happens a day or two before the pod drops into your feed as well. So look out for that on our social media if you want to get around us in the comments. But just finally, boys, Arnab on Facebook, also Arsenal fan, wants to know who wins this. Damo.
Spurs for me.
Jesse?
I think Spurs as well. I think everyone thinks it's going to be a tight game because it's a derby, and I think it may well be for the first half, but I have a feeling that Spurs might get a couple in the second half and kill the game. So I'm going to go with Spurs as well.
And Arnab, finally, he also wants to know when his boy Martinelli is going to get the minutes he deserves.
I think this is a good explanation of what your boy is. Not someone who's actually really that good, who deserves to play very often, but you incessantly gas them anyway. So,
I love me some Martinelli. I'm right there with Arnab. I want to see Swagelaide get some game time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, there's a lot of hype around him. He's still only 19 years old, but I don't think he's as good as everyone thinks he is.
He's my favourite pasta dish. I actually think when he's in form, he's a very, very good player. But I mean, because of his injury, he's been on the periphery all season. I'll be interested to see what Sal actually thinks about Martinelli. I think when he's back to full fitness, he was starting last season. We can't forget that.
All right, then. Well, you can always send us your questions, comments, or hot takes into mtakepodcast@gmail.com or via any of our social media in the comments or the DMs. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, we've posted links to those in the show notes. We'll take a quick break and then we'll come back to talk about the Champions League round of 16. Boys, Champions League round of 16. At least the first 4 games were played this week, and we'll chat about those in a moment. But I thought I'd hold this news item over to this section of the pod. But the sports flick UCL rights. I think this was talked about this week. I think it was confirmed that a small Sydney-based startup called Sportsflick have pinched the Champions League broadcast rights from Optus here in Australia, which is going to start next season after they bid around 60 million Australian dollars for the rights, which is like miles above what Optus bid to hold the rights. And this is going to complement the XFC and Serbian rugby quite nicely, I think, on Sportsflick's roster of sports. So, Damo, first of all, I guess what did you make of all of this?
I have no idea where the financial backing is coming from. I don't think anyone has any idea. And the CEO of the company has come out and said that we're wholly self-funded. I mean, it's a group of like 5 friends who have created this business, which, I mean, I think the whole idea of the business to start with was to be a streaming platform for people to gamble on random leagues around the world. That was the whole premise behind their business. And now all of a sudden they think that they're doing football a favor. And it's kind of the way that the owner has gone, is he wants to turn this into a football specific streaming platform. And that's kind of the avenue he's taken to talk about it publicly. So I don't know what's going on. They don't have the infrastructure, the facilities, or the people to run an enormous OTT platform. So
this is going to be my screen next year when I'm trying to watch all the sport. There'll be about 15 different apps, 15 different subscriptions, and I'll probably be more out of pocket to pay for all the different streaming devices. It's just an absolute ball ache. I mean, I feel like after everything we went through, I mean, you didn't go through this as much, Colby, because you were actually at the 2018 World Cup. But for those of us that were back home, watched it on Optus, it was an absolutely calamitous time. So many issues. And what happened on the back of that, as we've all experienced, is such a U-turn in customer service. Like, we've now got this service which, apart from the White Shoes boys who have the personality of a wooden spoon, the channel itself, and apart from the Burger King adverts every 2 minutes, is actually very, very good. I mean, it's doing really well. It's got Optus Fitness and Optus skills, and it's got classics. It's got all the things that we want in one place. And all of a sudden, you go in the morning to go to Premier League, to go to Champions League. Next year, we can't go to Champions League, so now we need another device and another platform to log into to watch the Champions League. And in other codes, you probably know as well, just recently, rugby has moved across from Fox as well. So now, if you want to watch rugby, you've got to go onto a different device. So for me, it's a pain in the ass. I'm the consumer, and it annoys me rather than actually makes me happy.
The cross-pollination of sharing of logins in group chats is just going to be absolutely wild. I don't know how I'm going to keep a handle on all these logins that will be flying around in all of the group chats. And that's definitely one thing. And I just want to go back to the money point that Damo made before. They say they're self-funded and no idea where this 60 million comes from. And I read a Guardian article where they were trying to unpack some of the shareholders of Sportsflick, and they seemed about as confused as anyone after the digging that they did as part of that article. But I'm just curious about, I mean, it doesn't seem to add up. It doesn't seem to stack up how this will all wash up and how they'll recoup all of this money, based on subscribers. If that's what they're paying just for the Champions League alone, the number of, and people on social media have done the maths and think that this is going to be a pretty tall ask. It just doesn't stack up. And it's funny what you said, Damo, about, this was originally supposed to be a betting front or something like that. And just something does not smell right about this.
It's founded on gambling, gambling, impossible budget. You do the math.
Where's the gap? Where's the gap going to be filled in by? I mean, they're either going to go bankrupt or the money's arriving to them in a brown paper bag somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I actually think that how this will all end up is that, I mean, it's still not official yet. It's not been confirmed by UEFA, who has the broadcast rights. This is all rumors at this stage. So I actually think this will wash up that, oh no, they couldn't come up with the money, so it's going back to Optus. And at the end of the day, this is just an enormous like promotion for Sportsflick, for this bunch of guys that have, you know, pretended like they were going to get the Champions League. And now everyone in Australia that knows football has heard about what Sportsflick is. And if you're into gambling, oh, why don't you come and join us now, and you can watch all these random leagues and gamble your life away.
This is our point of difference here. Like, we talk to our mates in the UK and that's just a nightmare for them to watch the different leagues because they've got to go through all these different channels. Our setup that we have, able to watch everything in one place for a reasonably cheap price, is great. That's a good thing that we actually have. It's a bit of a privilege. And the fact that they're sort of now fragmenting it out, I mean, you might be right, Damo, it might just be a massive PR stunt. But if it did happen, it's just, for me, as I said before, it annoys me rather than anything. It's like that Simpsons meme that we were sharing the other day, with all of them looking at, is it Homer in the car, and everyone's looking at him with a grumpy face, and it's like Sportsflix was the driver. I thought that was a pretty good meme to sum it up.
Well, maybe the silver lining to all of this is that, you know, the 20 million or whatever Optus were going to bid, maybe that could be placed into the coffers of the clubs of the A-League when they bid for the A-League, and then we might have the A-League and the Premier League in one place, Jesse. So fingers crossed for that. But this Sportsflick thing is super interesting and something that we'll continue to keep an eye on, listeners, and I'm sure it won't be the last we've heard of this whole saga, and we'll have to see how it goes next week when they actually come to having to put all of this on. But let's talk about the games. Let's talk about the Champions League games in the round of 16. So Dortmund and Sevilla was 2-2, and Dortmund go through 5-4 on aggregate. So they're through to the quarterfinal for the first time since 16-17, which was under Tuchel. Before that, they lost 2 second leg round of 16 ties against Spurs and PSG. Boys, do we rate Dortmund, or are we just all about Haaland?
I don't think Dortmund are a good enough side to get through the next round unless they get a pretty fortunate draw. They're not playing great football in the league. I know a Dortmund fan who is furious with the way the team's playing at the moment. So I actually don't think they're a great side, but they're being propped up by a great striker at the moment.
I'd agree with that.
Well, let's talk about it then. You know, the Erling Haaland show. He's 20 years old, and I think you tweeted this stat, Damo, and I've seen this stat around on a couple of places on social media now. But he's already scored 20 Champions League goals in 14 appearances. He's the fastest to 20 goals, beating Harry Kane. Took Harry Kane 24 appearances, so he's smashed him by some way. And he's already got more Champions League goals than the likes of Totti, Ronaldinho, Zidane, OG Ronaldo, Tevez, Falcao, etc. Like the list goes on and on. So I mean, at 20, he's already got some pretty serious clout in Champions League goal scoring circles. I mean, just before we go like all the way on Haaland, there was like about the game itself. There was this one moment of madness in the game in which Haaland summed up in his post-match presser after a penalty retake and his run-in with Sevilla keeper Bono, U2 frontman. That was wild. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I thought his post-match interview was brilliant, where he's like, I scored a great goal, but apparently it wasn't a goal. And then I took a penalty and the goalkeeper cheated, so I took it again and I scored. So I thought I'd celebrate. And I was like, oh, I love this guy. You know, he's just straight up honest. He's no bullshit in his interviews, and he's a bit of fun. I think a friend of mine said, Haaland's definitely that guy that gets in your DMs on Fortnite when he kills you.
Oh. And who signs him? Who signs him, boys? Like, where's Haaland playing next season?
I can't see him going anywhere but City.
It just would be just awful, wouldn't it?
Aguero is on his way out. They need another striker. His dad played for City. He always said he wanted to go and play in the Premier League like his dad. I mean,
his dad played for Leeds?
His dad played for City as well. So I think it was Roy Keane who ended his dad's career with that leg-breaking tackle in the Manchester derby. But I mean, it's got City all over it. They're really the only ones in the Premier League who've got the money for him. He's going to cost over $1 million. 100 million.
Yeah, yeah, he'll cost a lot more than $1 million.
Yeah, well, he will cost over $1 million, confirmed.
If he doesn't go to City, which is what I think we all think he's going to do, but if he doesn't go to City, the only other 4D chess move I could see happening is Chelsea offloading Werner, and potentially Liverpool picking up Werner and making space to pick up Haaland. That's the only other move I can see.
For all involved.
Yeah, I can just sort of see.
But I don't think Chelsea would sacrifice selling Werner to another Premier League club just to get in another striker that, potentially might not work.
Normally, I would agree with you, but
we love Chelsea flops at Liverpool.
Yeah, we do. But if it's Haaland, this is what I'm saying. Like, everyone knows how good this guy is. If they have the chance to sign him, and if it means that they flick Werner off, even if it's to a rival club, I feel like they'd do it. So something to consider, I guess.
I reckon Haaland's worth more than the whole club itself at the moment.
Yeah. And HSN, friend of the pod on Twitter, has unpacked this a bit as well. And yeah, he thinks it probably hasn't been long enough for Chelsea to change the front line in his view or their view. I don't know who HSN is really. Spurs don't need him, as if they could afford him anyway. City and Man United might have the money, but says that Aubameyang and Vardy are still keeping on as well. So they may not need Haaland because Aubameyang and Vardy are just as good. So moving on, boys. I'll leave that hanging out in the ether. Porto and Juventus. So Juve won on the day 3-2, but Porto go through on away goals 4-4 on aggregate. Juve failed to progress to the quarterfinals for the third straight season since signing Cristiano. They made it in the 2 seasons before he joined, by the way. And
they made 2 out of 3 finals in the 3 years before he joined, didn't they?
And in this game itself, we also saw that incident where CR7 was in the wall and turns away at the critical moment. Schoolboy stuff. Boys, how much of Juventus not progressing is fair to put on Cristiano?
I mean, it's kind of in the same way that if they were to go through because he scored 2 goals, or if they were to go through and he scored 1 goal, all the praise would go on him for getting them through. So he doesn't play well and they go out. So he kind of escapes a bit of the blame at the moment. But I also think it's ridiculously hard to put the blame on a 2-leg tie on a striker that, it's hard to put all the blame on one player, a 36-year-old man who's, he's Cristiano Ronaldo, but it's kind of a bit silly. But I think it was a good note on the last 3 exits. I just wanted to make this point. I'll have to get a little bit of a pronunciation confirmation from Andy, but the Juve chairman Andrea Agnelli, I'm pretty sure is how you would say it.
Oh, yeah.
The 3 clubs that have knocked Juve out in the last 3 years are Ajax, Lyon, and Porto, which are 3 clubs that the Juve chairman deemed not glamorous enough to be in the European Super League or the new Champions League. So
you'll love to see it.
It's a bit ironic.
Yeah. But just on Ronaldo then, I mean, like they paid absolutely bucket loads, just eye-watering amounts of money for Ronaldo. Big waste of money, boys?
I reckon they probably already made their money back in jersey sales alone.
Probably. I think on the Ronaldo thing, so I actually think that this is more indicative of the squad not working as opposed to just focusing on Ronaldo. So like this, one of the ones that I notice is De Ligt. So like he's coming off the bench. He's not starting for Juventus in these games. And this is the guy who was so fundamental to Ajax's run a couple of years ago. And he was expected to hit the ground running and be like a Ruben Dias or a Van Dijk for Juventus, and he hasn't been. And if you just take that as sort of a sample size across the squad, I mean, the best player for Juventus over the 2 legs was Chiesa. He basically kept them afloat. I mean, and going back to what you're saying before, Colby, about Ronaldo, like it was actually the defense that let Juventus down over the 2 legs. I mean, they gave away some absolute horrific mistakes in Porto in the first leg, and that's what put them behind the 8 ball in the first place. So I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear some more from Andy in Juve Corner, maybe next time he's on, just to see what he thinks. But I imagine he would be criticising the defence.
I think we get Andy and George on in a couple of weeks, and we'll have to come back to this, and we will have to talk Juventus. But I mean, it seems like from an outsider's perspective or a non-fan's perspective that it's just an aging squad that has gone too long, and they've left their run a lot, far too late before regenerating and revitalising the squad. So. And you just wonder how long Pirlo really has now that they're knocked out, and if they don't win the Scudetto, how long does he have?
I mean, if they don't win anything this season, he's gone. Like I mean, Juve have such high expectations of results. We talk about it. We've talked about it no end over the last few weeks about Melbourne Victory and their fans having high end for expectations. Juve, it's on another level. Like it's. As a minimum, you have to win a trophy every year, if not win the league every year. So if Pirlo walks away without winning anything, then there's no way he can keep his job.
Player manager CR7.
No, Ronaldo's leaving. They're going to sell him. Build the team around Weston McKennie.
Two more games to go in this, boys. We'll touch on them quickly. PSG Barcelona 1-1. PSG cruised through 5-2 on aggregate. They didn't bottle it. We were hoping they might, just so that we could get another wild comeback between these two, but it wasn't to be. Damo, I think you watched this one. What stood out to you in this one?
I mean, the standout was Messi's goal, wasn't it? It was unbelievable. Apart from that, it was a bit of a lackluster game in the second half. I thought the first half was great. It was very end to end, and I think if Messi missed a penalty right on the stroke of half time there, I think if he scored that, the second half would have been a very, very different game. Barca would have been within 2 goals of being able to bring it back. And I think, anything can happen when Barca are chasing 2 goals. They scored 2 in extra time, in injury time, just 3 days earlier to go through to the Copa del Rey final. So, I think that penalty miss was the momentum shift that just meant PSG could kind of walk through easily to the result.
And finally, Liverpool and RB Leipzig. Liverpool got the job done, 2-0 in this one, 4-0 on aggregate, despite their recent run of dreadful domestic form. The thing that stood out to me, I saw the XG philosophy on Twitter, tweeted the XG for this one, 2-0 to Liverpool. Liverpool's XG was 3.37 and Leipzig's was 0.92. So both teams underperformed their XG, and I just thought that really made sense because that's how the game played to me. It was just 2 teams that weren't quite as good as they should have been, and the result was still what you would have expected it to be. So it was just a bit of a deflating game, I think. Like, great for Liverpool. They'll be happy to go through, but and they can take some other positives from this. But Jesse, what do you think Liverpool will be taking from this?
Well, that's the game in the Premier League that they've been trying to get for the last couple of weeks. Just to win in a clean sheet, just to stop the rot. And I know that they have still managed to win Champions League games in between the league, but this one's probably more significant because they have been on such a dreadful slide. So, for me, just watching it, I was just praying for a clean sheet and praying they don't have a collapse, and they managed to do both of those things. So, I think that the key thing here is he put Fabinho back in the midfield, and what a change that made. I think we all knew that was a big reason why they've just been getting cut to ribbons in the midfield. But it didn't make it any less surprising when you put Fabinho in there. What a difference he made. He was just in the way of everything, and some last ditch tackles just frustrated Leipzig. But going back to your original point, I think it could have been a different game if Leipzig were more clinical. They just created a lot of opportunities, and just once they got to the final part of the move, they couldn't put it away. So maybe if they'd scored in the first half, we'd have a very different result. But luckily they didn't for us. Yeah,
I think that's a good point you make, Jesse, because I feel like when your confidence is low, which it is in the playing group at Liverpool at the moment, and we've seen in a couple of these losses they've had in the Premier League, when they have conceded, it hasn't been the Liverpool that seemed unbeatable, that could turn anything around. It's kind of deflated everyone. So I think you're right. If Leipzig had scored early, it could have been a very, very different tie. But like you said, Liverpool will be happy with the clean sheet and a win, and see who they get in the next round. Boys, do you think Liverpool have got any chance to challenge, or at least even get to a semi-final? Can they get through the next round?
Well, just on that, Damo, there was a good couple of stats going around about Liverpool's prospects. So back in 2005, you might remember they beat a German team in the round of 16. They were sitting outside of the top 4 domestically, and that was coincidentally the last time there was no Messi or Ronaldo in the quarterfinals. And there was a final in that year in Istanbul, which the final this year is in Istanbul.
I want to know who is the man
draw your own
finding
conclusions.
these stats.
Draw your own conclusions.
Well, I think just to add to that, AC Milan is basically Bayern Munich. So if we end up in the final against Bayern Munich, then I mean we'll probably be 3-0 down at halftime and cue the miracle.
You heard it here first. So the round of 16 comes to a close next week with Chelsea and Atleti, City and Gladbach, Real Madrid and Atalanta, and Bayern and Lazio. And we'll be covering that, of course, on the pod. But that's going to do it for us today, boys. And thanks all for listening as usual. If you've enjoyed the show today, we'd love it if you could give us a review on Apple Podcasts or share the pod on your social media. Tell your mates to give us a listen. It helps us to get heard amongst the 50,000 other fan-based Australian football podcasts. So it's nice. It's nice to have you here listening to the pod. And you can follow us as well on social media, Twitter and Facebook. We're also on Instagram and YouTube as well. And we will post all of the links to those in the show notes. Next week, match day 29 of the Premier League, A-League match week 12, and the Champions League round of 16. Until then, enjoy the football.